Greetings and various assorted salutations, and welcome to the first official lecture on the ancient world civilizations. The idea behind this lecture series and these type of videos is to introduce the very basics of the civilization for the students' awareness, or whoever's watching these videos. Most of these videos will then be followed by a video where we look at some aspect of the architecture, and I just rant and ramble about various topics around it while playing Minecraft. But first, an introduction. And today's introduction is of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is where most of the earliest recorded cities are found. And just a fun fact, the pictures for this are provided from one of my colleagues who's actually been to the ancient city of Ur, or Ur. I'm not exactly sure on pronunciation. Spelled U-R, so it's probably Ur. That's to my lied. Anyways, so the basic goal I've already talked about. Essentially what this amounts to is we're going to look at the modern references of the civilization, like what are people talking about it today, and then we're going to go into the kind of a almost journalistic who, what, when, where, how kind of thing to give people an idea of, okay, this is where it is, this is what it's all about. And then the last section is any notable developments. Essentially, these are the things that people talk about if you were to dive more into the topic. But without further ado, let's dive in. So, with the Mesopotamians, what we think of today with Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, is first off, many people think of Isis. Isis, as you may know, was actively destroying archaeological sites and museum treasures that were in the Middle East. The reason for the destruction of these things, Nineveh is an example of one of the things that they damaged. One of the reasons for this is the Mesopotamians were polytheistic, and ISIS is a fundamentalist radical Muslim group. And one of the traits of fundamentalists is that they believe they are absolutely right and everyone else is wrong. And polytheism is a very big no-no in world in certain religions, and so that's what happens here. So even though this is a bit dated, the damage done to various architecture and historical sites such as Nineveh are immense, and a lot was lost. Also, ISIS, though they were preach radicalism, they often also sold many artifacts. And so one student was telling me last semester about how a story came up where Hobby Lobby had purchased some ancient historical artifacts illegally. And so one of the other challenges that you hear about is you hear about a lot of destruction, because many of these sites are in war zones or places that can become war zones very easily, or there's a lot of archaeological theft going on as well. But there's kind of a list. These articles, once again, are not the most recent lists, but also the college I went to, St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, they had a number of librarians going around trying to preserve historic sites. So this is what a lot of people think of. Now, with pop culture, the Mesopotamians don't come up a whole lot. There aren't a whole lot of references to them. If you ever read, there's a famous book, it's not really very commonly mentioned anymore, it was more popular in the 30s, but there was the book, The Richest Man in Babylon, which has very little to do with actual Babylon. It's just a book of financial advice that is set in Babylon. But for most pop culture, a lot of people are thinking of Doom. There's a new Doom game coming out soon. There was a Doom movie earlier that had mixed reviews. But Doom is one of the things that references Mesopotamia, especially the Mesopotamian afterlife, which is rather dark and grim. Students in my class, one of the things we'll look at a bit later on in the classes, we'll actually look at the religion of the Mesopotamians, its polytheistic characteristics, and what they thought about the afterlife. one of the things you'll see with many of the ancient civilizations we study is they have differing views on what comes next. And for our class, the goal is to study it so that we're aware of how does this inform their culture. So maybe someday I'll do a Let's Play of one of the Doom games. I'm sure that will result in amusing results to my YouTube channel. Anyways, let's roll on through. So here are the basics of the Mesopotamians. Who are they? They're collectively referred to as the Sumerians. At some point, they transitioned from a nomadic lifestyle to one of farming / gathering, and then more purely farming, and expanded into trading in an area called the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. The Sumerians are going to be groups of people that set up city-states and trade networks, and often they are referred to as the cradle of civilization. Naturally, I was mentioning a few wheres. Let's talk about the where. Where we're finding the Sumerians is in what is modern-day Iraq, but it's between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Between these two rivers, you had some good farmland, though as it's noted up here, it's prone to unpredictable flooding, and the Mesopotamians often noted the hazards of this. These are just some of the cities. There were many city-states. You'll also notice that the coastline is further up. As time has changed, the Middle East's geography has changed as well. Each of these city-states for at least some time was independent. Now let's talk about when. This is a Bronze Age civilization, and archaeology indicates that people were in this area around 5000 BC. In 3300 BC is when we find the earliest writing samples in this area. Meanwhile, if you're a fan of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the historical king that the story is likely based on, however loosely that might be, he would have been ruling the city of Ur in 2700 BC. This city here, Eridu, which I probably just mispronounced, this city here is often considered the earliest, the oldest of the cities. But Ur is one of the more famous ones. The pictures that you're seeing are from Ur. Now, most of the cities were unified under Sargon I in this year. And the reason what we'll look at when we get to that is we will look at the concept of empires. So those of you who are in my class, in the Mesopotamia unit, we will take a brief look at city-states, and we will look at what are empires and how they're different from city-states. So just something you're aware of. Now, the how section is a bit vague, but essentially, the Mesopotamians, since they're one of your earliest civilizations, if not one of the earliest, the thing that's significant about them is they're one of the first groups to organize their entire world around farming. The city-state system, where essentially the city and the farmlands around it form a state, or essentially a place where government, defense, and religion all kind of converge, sits. Essentially, what's significant about the Mesopotamians is they're one of the first groups to do this, which nowadays feels rather obvious, but historically, up until this point, no humans have really done anything like that before. But each of these city-states was a fully functioning, self-sustaining unit that did not necessarily get along well with its neighbors. Anyways. Now let's move on to notable accomplishments. As I kind of alluded to before, we have the city-state as one of their notable accomplishments. Essentially, the Mesopotamians set up the idea of city-state. More famously, you're going to hear about them with the Greeks, though many places have city-states. You'll find them in the New World with the Mayans and the Aztecs before their empire. But the basic idea behind a city-state is its political organization centered around the city as the highest form of public authority. The city-state and the lands around it form a political unit of self-rule. That's the idea behind it. Another significant thing is the Mesopotamians developed their own writing system. For students interested in this, in my class, we have an articles section where you get to pick a topic of your interest. Some of these topics include religion, world leaders like Hammurabi in this case for this unit, and cuneiform, the writing system. Essentially, the big idea behind writing systems is for record keeping. The thing that's important about farming societies is they have to be very organized. You have a lot of people. It's not like a small nomadic band where you can kind of see and know everyone. Often in a city-state, you don't know everyone. And so one of the big things that's really important in city-states and more complicated forms of government and with farming communities is you have to have coordination. And so the cuneiform is the writing system that the ancient Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, used. It was originally used for record keeping, like keeping track of grain storage, who's contributing what. Later on, it's used to record history and religious matters. And cuneiform is interesting because it's written on clay tablets using styluses made from reeds that were plucked from the Tigris and Euphrates River, growing alongside that river, those rivers. The nice thing about this is cuneiform preserves really well. And so once we figured out how to read cuneiform, there was plenty to read because it keeps really well. It doesn't rot like paper. Mathematics is something the Mesopotamians are also quite famous for. Some people will argue, and I'm sure you'll find some videos on YouTube, that the Mesopotamian mathematics is actually more precise and superior to the Greek mathematics that we base modern mathematics on. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. I'm not a math expert. But mathematics were developed once again to organize with city-states, with farming communities. Organization becomes important because you have to figure out how much crop do you have, is it enough, who's doing what, things like that. And so the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians, Sumerians, they developed addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division to meet these issues. But that's all I've got for this first lecture. I tried to keep it short, but also give you an idea of what we're doing in this class. So hopefully what you'll take away from this is who are the Mesopotamians, or Sumerians if you want to call them that, where are they, who are they, what have they accomplished, and if they're being talked about in the modern era, what are they being talked about? So with all that being said, until later.